So thank you all very much for taking the time to do this. I'm personally excited about this for the plain fact of we're talking about marketing and it's the security industry, which is not something that has necessarily happened in a lot of ways. On top of that, it's kind of exciting for me to see a company like 6Sense get involved with an organization like ours. My wife worked with a lot of the people that worked there before in the past, so it's good to see some old faces and have opportunities to engage with other people. But so today, as you all know, it's account-based marketing. You'll hear the term ABM used a lot. So that is account-based marketing when we do that. But it's really about what do you need to know. So we're going to dig into really the basics of it. And we have an expert who's been doing this for a long time. Kerry Cunningham is going to join us and do most of the talking through this. I'm going to help just sort of guide through questions and that, but Kerry will do most of the talking on your end. And we're really going to get into the basics of what it is, but then also at the end, I think you'll walk away with like, okay, so now what should we do? So like all of these, feel free to ask questions, put them in the Q&A section. Hillary's here helping sort of guide us through that on that end. And we will promise to get through all of those. So we're going to prioritize the questions that are there. We have some support material, but most of this is going to be done as a conversation throughout. So again, I see some of the names that are on here. I recognize a good amount of them. I know you're not typically shy, so don't be shy on this end. But so let's just jump right into it. So Kerry, if you don't mind, if you could just give a quick introduction to who you are, 6Sense, and your background really, because I think that will show people that it's a bit of a treat, especially for those that are interested in account-based marketing, to have someone of your background do this with us. So thank you very much for taking the time. Thank you, Will, for helping set this up. And thank you, 6Sense, for engaging with us. And we believe in this enough that, again, this isn't like something that we're selling to anybody as an organization. We believe this is a fundamental piece of how our industry is moving forward. And those that get into this early are going to benefit greatly. So thank you for doing this.
Yeah, it's absolutely my pleasure, Lee. So thanks for having me today. Glad to be here. So first of all, I spent about 25 years or so right in the middle of B2B demand gen marketing for technology companies. Spent most of my career in the San Francisco Bay Area and I've literally worked with hundreds of companies throughout my career. Over the last 7.5 years, I spent at SiriusDecisions, which is an analyst firm in the B2B marketing and sales space. And then SiriusDecisions was acquired by Forrester, a larger analyst firm in the space that I think most folks are pretty familiar with. During that time at SiriusDecisions and Forrester, I think particularly during the SiriusDecisions days, we really led the movement away from what had been a form of marketing in B2B that we really didn't think was serving the market very well. And we're going to talk a lot about what that was and why that was the case today. But my colleagues and I developed some models and frameworks. A lot of people are familiar with SiriusDecisions Waterfall, now the Forrester Waterfall. And I've been fortunate enough to be the co-author of that, the last couple of versions of that over the last few years. I moved over to 6Sense just about 5 weeks ago. And the reason I did is that a lot of the models and frameworks, the concepts that we've been promoting at Forrester as best practices can only be enabled through the right kinds of technologies, can only be really executed properly if you have the right kinds of technology in place. And 6Sense makes that technology far and away the best, most complete platform for doing what you should be doing in B2B to attract and engage customers, doing that properly. And so it just seemed like a really great fit, great time to move over. And that was just a few weeks ago. So I'm still getting my feet wet, but good times already.
Very good. Well, it's good. So definitely the background to do this. So today our goals we're going to cover is ABM is a thing and what it is. ABM is something you can and need to do, and then the next steps to do it. So if those are the goals we're going to cover, let's just start off quickly with what is account-based marketing? How would you define it?
Yeah, I'm going to pull up a slide, and I'll show slides a couple of times throughout the time that we're talking today. This is not meant to be a slideshow from beginning to end or a monologue. But it's helpful to have the words on the screen so that people can see what we're talking about. So the ABM itself is a strategy in B2B that is focused on making sure that marketing and sales agree on the set of accounts that you should be selling to. And it doesn't mean that you have to know the names of each one of those accounts necessarily when you sit down to start your planning, but you should know how to identify those accounts, either by going out and looking for accounts that fit an ideal profile, or if you have marketing and leads that are driving people to your website and filling out forms, that you can tell when somebody who's done that is from one of those accounts that we all agree that we should sell something to. Now, some of you probably, when we say that marketing and sales should agree on a set of accounts, or at least that ideal profile, some of you are thinking, well, no kidding, that's like the most basic, simplest thing ever. And then some of you are thinking, that sounds impossible. Right? So, that spectrum from, of course, to that sounds impossible that we could agree is what we find in reality, that all companies are on that spectrum somewhere, and a lot of companies move back and forth on that spectrum over time. It's absolutely critical. You have to get to one end of it. So if you're at the end where you think that's impossible today, I'd say pretty much you should drop everything and get to the end where you can say, yeah, we agree on the set of accounts that we could sell something to. Because until you get there, it's very difficult to do the rest of the stuff that we're going to talk about. So once you understand the accounts, ABM is about knowing those accounts, right? So that's why it's so important to agree on which ones they are, because knowing them requires an investment, right? And you need to know them in order to understand those buyers' needs. You've got to be focused on those. And to be able to address those needs, both with your solutions and also, and maybe even especially with how you talk about them. And that comes to the idea of personalizing content or putting content in the right context for that set of accounts. What can we say about what we offer that is going to resonate with the people that we think we ought to be selling to? The bullet that says engage the right way is the way that your buyers want to be engaged with, right? So the right way is not the way that you're most comfortable with. It's not the way that you've done it in the past. It's how does your buyer consume information? How do they receive the kinds of intelligence they're going to need to make good decisions? And you've got to meet them there. That's your job as a revenue team. And then measuring what matters. Most organizations today, whether it's in technology or security or other spaces, like to look at two things. They look at leads on the front end. How many leads do we get? And marketing is focused on that. And sales is focused on revenue. In between those things are a number of milestones, a number of things that we got to look at that we all have to agree. So not only does marketing and sales have to agree on the set of accounts, we also have to agree on the set of things that we're going to care about and focus on. And one of the things that we'll see as we talk about why ABM and why not other approaches is that the things that B2B organizations have been focused on for the last, say, 12, 15 years are not the right things. For the most part. We'll talk about why they aren't, we'll talk about how it got there, and then what you should be doing instead as we get further into the conversation today.
Yeah, so why don't we talk about that? Because a lot of times you'll equate this to demand gen of what we've known historically, right? Versus account-based marketing, which is, could possibly be a little bit of marketing magic on top of recreating demand gen, but I jokingly say that, but it is different. So, and let's talk a little bit about that. Like, what are those metrics when you look at the differentiation between demand gen to account-based marketing, and what are you typically tracking, and how you separate those two? And I guess, if going a little bit off script here, but how do demand gen and ABM play? Like, or what is the difference? Like, if you could speak to that a little bit, because I hear some of it and I think, oh, demand gen, but this might be maybe the 3.0 model of it. I don't know. You tell us.
Sure. Yeah. So one of the things that we're already doing in this conversation, and it's very, very common that we do, is we distinguish demand gen from ABM, and that is the way that most folks talk about it. But I think what we really should be saying is, what's the right way to do demand gen, and then the right way to do demand gen is ABM. right? So, and the difference between the wrong way to do ABM and the right way to do it comes down to those things we just talked about. And it begins with understanding what that set of accounts that you could sell to is. All right. So in any market, there are a set of accounts that are a good fit, like they look like that's an account that fits the profile of somebody that we could be selling to. That's the very first thing that you should be looking at and measuring. And it's astonishing to me how often organizations don't have a clear idea of what that looks like. All right. So if you don't, then any goals that you set, any metrics that you're going to track are going to be somewhat arbitrary. Right. So if you don't know whether your market consists of 100 really great accounts that you could sell to or 1,000, any goals that you set and any metrics you track along the way are just going to be random, right, with respect to that. So that first thing is really, really important. And what we'll do is work backward from there. So if there's a set of accounts that you think is the right set of accounts, then the question you have to ask yourself is, in any given period of time, how many of those accounts are likely to be in market? And that can change and fluctuate, and your estimates of that may not be great. But we ideally would like to know. And then we want to go find out how many are in market right now. We'll talk about how to do that as we talk about what more of the details of what ABM is. But we really want to, and the technology enables us today to go out and understand which prospects are in market. So you start with a measurement of how many there are. The next thing we want to know is how many appear to be in market in a given point in time. And then that demand gen piece kicks in. How many of those accounts that we could sell to are engaging with us, right? So either sales is talking to them, or they're coming to our website and filling out forms or looking at our content anonymously. How many of them are engaging with us? And so as we look at how many organizations are out in market looking around and how many are engaging with us, the difference between those two things is really important, right? So if there's 100 accounts that you could sell to, and we look and we find through systems like 6Sense that 50 of them appear to be out in market looking around right now, if only 10 of those 50 are interacting with us at all, only 10 have come to our website or are talking to sales in any way, then there's a huge gap that we need to fill. Like if there's 50 people out looking, 50 organizations out looking around, then we want 50 of them to be looking at us and engaging with us. Now, most organizations are not going to get every account that's in market to come engage with us, but that's the goal, right? If they're in market, we want them to come to us. And that's a really important job for marketing to do. That's kind of at the top end of what marketing needs to do, is get those accounts that are in market to come with us. And here's the importance of an ABM approach. An ABM approach is, here's that set of accounts that we care about. So we're going to focus our marketing energy into that set of accounts that we care about. Now, if that's a huge set of accounts, you may not have budget for getting in front of all of those. And that's where understanding which of those appear to be in market now is really important, because if we can measure which ones are in market, and we'll talk about how to do that, then we want to focus our marketing energies on that set, right? If they're in market, get them to come to engage with us. So now we've got how many accounts, how many are in market, how many are engaging with us. And once they start engaging with us, how many are we engaging directly with a human being? How many are talking to an SDR, a sales rep? And then what's going to pipeline? And then from pipeline down through your sales stages. So the metrics are all at the organizational or account level. And then the thing you want to look at is, if I've got multiple solutions, if you sell 2, 3, 4 things, then an account may represent multiple solutions. So if you've got 100 accounts that you're focused on and 3 solutions, you really have 300 potential opportunities. And where you want to be measuring is how many of all of those 300, how are we doing against each one of those, right? Now that may seem like nirvana, and for a lot of organizations that would be difficult to do. But every step you take toward getting to that level of detail is going to be really great for your organization. It's going to make sure that you're running effectively.
Yeah, what's interesting there though too is, so if you're to break, like in our industry, the different areas that, if I look at who's on the call here too, we have manufacturers, we have systems integrators and whatnot. But so from a manufacturing standpoint, historically, that was all done by the channel in a lot of ways, right? And the the salespeople in the marketplace supported that. We had some end user reps, of course, yes, that would go out. But what's interesting is that I wonder how many organizations from a manufacturing standpoint have tied back the localization of attracting certain accounts and targeting from a marketing standpoint back to the marketing department that's at the corporate, if you would, that is looking at the leads. Because in a lot of ways, I would say their job was, they being the marketing department, at least of a lot of the organizations I worked in, was number one, their job was product marketing. It was sort of like supporting that. Then they had lead gen, right? And lead gen was really about how many leads did I gather. I went to trade shows or inbound calls, or people filled out a form online, and then I threw that out over to maybe inside sales, maybe out. When I'm an integrator on that end, a lot of times, some of them I see in here are a little bit larger, but most of the smaller firms that are out there are sort of like, if it came in, I didn't care. And it was referral based type. Maybe I did some marketing local in the marketplace. As a larger one, you do have marketing. A lot of it's done through thought leadership and creation of content creation, of attracting people that go through. But, and it's things like, MQLs, right? As the typical term that you hear being used. Now, with that, is MQLs tied to this as well, or is that different? Like, is that demand gen? Like, how do I separate inbound traffic and MQLs from what you're talking about?
Good question. And actually, there's two or three things in what you're just saying that are really interesting together. No, they're really, really good. So, back in my old days, I spent something like 17 years working in a B2B teleservices organization where we did lead gen on the phone for technology companies, and also inbound lead follow-up and those kinds of things, and worked with many dozens of companies in that respect. Now and I've been in this business since before there were inbound leads. Let's be clear about that. So back in the old days, everything was account-based, right? Before there was digital marketing, and before there were web-based marketing, digital marketing, everything was account-based, right? So companies varied in how well aligned they were with marketing and sales, but for the most part, everybody knew that there was a set of accounts that we could sell to, did a reasonable job of understanding what that was, because none of them were going to be coming inbound to you. You had to go get them. And if you're going to go get them and go prospect into them, you got to know who they are, right? So in the old days, before there were leads and MQLs, everybody was account-based. Now, during that time, my firm did a lot of work for channel partners. And those channel partners would always know, who is in their patch, what are the accounts in our patch that we sell to, what are the high value ones, what are the lower value ones, et cetera. And so in that environment, it was always the case that those channel partners had a really good idea of what their market looked like. What we're talking about today is, if you are the manufacturer, if you're the provider, then it's really what we're talking about is understanding from all of the channel partners that you have. We want to kind of take the sum of all of the set of accounts that they care about, that they know of, and roll that up, right? That's what we want to know about. And it's the same thing with the direct sales force. One of the ways to think about having marketing aligning with sales on the set of accounts is to go to each sales rep and say, okay, what is your plan for the next quarter? What are the set of accounts in your territory that you're going to be working on the next quarter? Like, the roll up of that to the central is the set of accounts that marketing should be focused on, right? That's the one. Now, in a lot of cases, there hasn't been a lot of thought that goes into which account sales is going to focus on. So we would like a lot of thought to go into that and make sure that that's really clear. But that really could be the case, that you want to just roll those up. Right. So that's the answer, I think, around the when you sell through the channel is it doesn't do any good to create demand for accounts that your channel partners don't want to or can't sell effectively to. Same as with your direct teams.
But man, that is, if you think about it, though, from an industry where you have your key accounts where you can do that with, that they give you that information, but there's always been this like thing where it's like they take care of that, you take care of that. But no, it is super interesting to think. It's a shift of how things are done on that end. It also is interesting that it's a different interaction that marketing has with a sales organization, where sometimes you see sales and marketing together, but it's marketing is sometimes seen as, they make cut sheets and stuff like that. They and some lead gen, but not. This is a whole nother level of, it's almost strategic marketing on that end.
Yeah, well, take the word almost off, and we agree.
It is. Yeah, with it. So, question came through from Colin Dupree. He asked, "How do you differentiate ABM for targets versus existing clients?"
Well, you don't really. I mean, I think that is a great question, but the only way you do it is you're starting from a different point, right? So, with existing clients, you're looking for cross-sell and upsell opportunities, and of course, the renewal opportunities. With existing clients, you almost always have an account-based approach, right? Because you already have that account. You've got people assigned to it from a sales perspective, from a customer support, a success perspective. And so you're already taking an ABM approach if they're an existing account. Where that translates to net new is that you want to actually look at that set of accounts that are your target accounts. You want to look at them the same way. You're developing a relationship with them instead of already having one, but you're still going to look at that account, that set of accounts that are targets, and say, okay, well, what's the right approach? How do we deliver our messages about solutions to the right people in the right way? And so it's really the same. It's the same approach, but if you're with your existing customers, you're starting with those relationships already in place. The other thing I'll say is, you've got existing customers that probably are not a great fit sometimes, and that won't be long-term customers, or may not be long-term customers. And sometimes you have to look at that as well.
That's an interesting thing to think about. That's almost like, that's a hard conversation, but I see what you mean there on that end, especially too, as product shift, customer type shift, vertical shift, where the marketplace is going, where, you may have been serving a marketplace that is utilizing older technology or older products, and you want to move people to put it. So yeah, I could see that. Got a good amount of questions coming in. So if you don't mind, we'll just keep doing those, and then we'll go back to the to the script that we have. But if you're to look at, what have been your biggest challenges in creating an account-based marketing strategy?
The biggest one right now is that the entire world of B2B is set up on a set of technologies that don't enable you to do the right thing. And we can talk about that now. There's some slides that will kind of illustrate that. But most B2B organizations have some measure of a CRM system of some kind that's going to keep track of the accounts and help salespeople do that. And most B2B organizations today have some kind of marketing automation platform in place, whether it's HubSpot or Marketo, Eloqua, others, that are helping to set up landing pages and collect leads when people fill out forms and those kinds of things. Now, back in the old days, I mentioned that all of B2B used to be account-based. About 15 years ago, when marketing automation platforms first became a thing, we developed the ability to capture inbound leads at scale, where people would come to a website and fill out forms. And that seemed like a really great thing. And that's where the whole MQL demand gen approach comes from. Shouldn't we just be driving people to our website, filling out forms, and then we'll go follow up with them? Now, the problem is that the people who come to your website and fill out your forms are often not the people that you should be selling to. And so here begins the big divide between marketing and sales. When you have marketing saying, here's a bunch of people who filled out forms, they responded to our marketing, they read our white paper. And so you pass those over to sales, and sales looks at them and says, I can't sell anything to these guys. Not only are they not the right people in these accounts, but they're not the right accounts. This is where the big marketing sales divide really happened. And so when that's the case, and marketing systems only see leads, it's very difficult to implement a program between marketing and sales that's going to work very effectively. There's another big problem, and I'll bring up some slides in a second to show. And in fact, I'll bring up some slides to show now, because I think it's useful to, at this stage, to talk through why The leads-based processes don't work particularly well in B2B, and also look at the nature of and it really has a lot to do with the nature of the buyer, and what gets in the way of implementing an ABM program often are the systems that have produced where we are. So we talked about the fact that we had these leads coming in, marketing qualified leads, MQLs, typically just somebody who's filled out a form and then has either engaged in enough activities so that we've decided that they're a qualified lead, or they're in many cases would just pass all of the people who filled out a form over to sales or SDRs and call them MQLs. People got drunk on this 10 or 12 years ago because it was amazing that people who could be prospects were filling out forms and giving you their email addresses. I mean, that was just phenomenal. And the job of trying to talk to prospects got a whole lot easier when they started doing that. So that was great. The problem is most of the people who fill out the forms aren't actually buyers. And so they're just clogging up your systems. There's that set of things that you're sending over to sales, and sales goes, these are no good, right? And they're no good because they are no good. They're not buyers. They're not people who are actually in a buying process right now. And then the other problem is a lot of the real buyers don't fill out forms. So the people who are actually in market are not going to fill out a form. And one of the reasons we know that is that when marketing organizations look at their conversion rate on their website, what's the conversion rate of a visitor to somebody who fills out a form? It's in B2B, it's between 5 and 2%, sometimes lower than that. So 95 to 98% of the people who come to your website are not filling out a form. They're just looking at your content anonymously. What does that tell you? Well, if you're a B2B organization, you make a specialized solution for the security industry or any other industry, really. People are not getting to your website by accident, right? They're not there because you've got spectacular graphics. Right? If they're on your website, it's because they're interested in your solutions. Now, it doesn't mean they're all buyers, but it does tell you that you should be paying attention to who's on your website. We'll come back to that in a minute. So it's really important to understand what these limitations are. One, most of the people who fill out the forms and become leads are not buyers. And then a lot of the buyers who really are in market don't fill out the forms. So you've got two errors. You've got a lot of false positives in your leads, and then a lot of false negatives in the people who didn't fill out the forms. The other thing, and this is a really, really important, and I want to get your feedback on this one, Lee, for the security industry, is that in B2B, the buyer is very rarely an individual person. The buyer is almost always a team of people, committee of people that are working together to go identify solutions. Now, across B2B, the data shows that the buying team is somewhere between 5 and 20 people in most cases. And our research back at Serious Decisions showed that virtually all of those people, even C-level people, do some of their own research and have, on average, about 12 interactions with prospect organizations, whether it's going to their website, talking with salespeople, and those kinds of things. So there's a whole bunch of people involved. And just focusing on one person who filled out a form kind of obscures the fact that there are a lot of people involved. So Lee, what does a typical, I know that there are segments, but what would a typical buying team look like, or typical buying teams in different segments?
Yeah, so so I'll go back a little bit to go forward on that. But the way I look at it is historically, right, our industry has been heavy focused on high security, with really a pretty good use case, which was keeping bad people out and keeping people safe, right? And then it's evolved where the marketplace has gotten larger and bigger. We've gone downstream, the verticals, and so we've been taking, I would say, the 30-year-old tactics that we've had and have been doing and applying them to the new, that of how people learn, how the verticals that we're going after, because frankly, marketing is. And I hope I can hear the cheers when I say this through, but marketing has been an underserved discipline within our industry where we haven't necessarily gotten the resources, so we do best we can. And frankly, we've relied heavily on local and national trade shows as like the main events of what we've done on that. And in digital marketing, up until the pandemic, really it's been slight. Like if you look at Twitter right now and places too where people go, it's primarily our websites are predominantly, and then some pieces that go into magazines that the magazines take and make digital. And I mean, LinkedIn has been a big boom for our industry on that end, but still, we're in the early innings. That's the good news, in my opinion, about this, is that we are definitely in the early innings of it, and it's an opportunity to go forward on that end. But so as the buyer has changed, as the pandemic has changed, how we buy and how we talk and what our use cases are, the value propositions. Like, the conversation sitting around the table now with like legal and HR, as our systems now are getting deeper into health attestation and the wellness side of things. And, I'll speak to access control. As access control becomes a feature of larger value propositions, it changes the buyer. Now, that being said, we talk about old truths and new truths a lot with our stuff. There's still an entire world of high security that's not going away, and it still exists, where a security buyer is still buying camera systems, video systems, access control locks, whatever it might be, for security reasons. That's a core tenet, in my opinion, on why people do it anyway. So that buyer is still there, but as more people get involved, the budgets open up, the opportunities to attract buyers changes. So if I'm an HR person and I don't know what I'm even looking for, right? Like, I'm like, I need to help get people back to the office. I don't think they don't speak our language as an industry, where they're like, I need a visitor management system. Like, I don't think they're thinking in that term. Or, I don't even think they use terms like access control. I think they think like card key systems, or, they may open up their wallet and look at the one that they have and it says HID on it. So they're like, oh, an HID system is what, and like they don't know, right? And that end. So getting creative with how we do that and understand who the buyers are is going to be, we're building the plane and flying it, frankly, right now when it comes to that. But off the top of my head, security departments, HR, legal, anyone who right now, especially coming out of the pandemic, that is in charge of risk, like that sometimes is the CFO, it's sometimes the CSO, it just depends on that end. But it's ever changing, and it's going to, I think, continue to evolve. And the good news is, like, people that are on here that are listening to it, you're early in. Now, I'm gonna also recognize that currently, right now in our industry, the companies that have been doing this a lot have been the startups that have come from, I would say, outside of our industry, that maybe have done this in the tech world. And frankly, there's been one that's been very well recognized as has had some bad acting problems along with it. And then I would also say our industry has grumbled back at this idea that we're now talking directly to the end users in that. So there's been, I think, misdirected views on whether this is effective and whether it should be used, because it gets colored in some of the other garbage that goes on that is rightfully so. That company's been doing bad stuff and should be highlighted for that. But it shouldn't make it sound like this account-based marketing is a bad thing, or also that, one of the questions actually we have on here is, how do manufacturers and systems integrators work together to be successful managing ABM? Part of the first start is, I think, and I'll go first, and I'll have you think about it. But, in any of these, I think this is a great example of something that needs to be introduced in a integrator dealer program that hasn't been before. And part of the conversation of like expectation setting, like, hey, we're going to be doing this. You're involved in it. Here's your expectations of being involved as well. And then here's the return on investment that you're going to get by us doing that. Right. So like that I think being part of a program and early, I think where it gets wrong is if we do it in the dark of the night and don't tell them about it, and then we bring them leads and we're like, hey, we noticed that so-and-so and so-and-so has been on our website forever, and we've contacted them, this and that. And they're like, wait, what, you're doing all that? Like, so getting it early, getting it part of the program, figuring out how they can get involved and being transparent about it, in my opinion, is like the number one thing that you can do. And making it part of the program that you bring to them that is beyond them. You get rewarded based off of how much you buy, but this is the habits side of that equilibrium of program. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, what you said about that does bring me back to kind of that old days where we used to go out and do prospecting for ISVs, for systems integrators, et cetera. And those guys always knew who we should go after. right? Some were better than others in picking those exact accounts, but each one of them had a really good idea. And often it was, of course, the manufacturers paying for the program with those dollars, but the accounts were chosen by the channel partner. And so I think, as the very first principle of ABM is that we're going to agree on the set of accounts that we're going after. It just, to me, it highlights the importance of that. That's the first most important thing you can do, period. It's the same as any cliche you might have about having a goal and knowing where you're going. If you don't know where you're going, you're not going to get there. Where you're going is toward these target accounts. You have to agree on what those are. And that agreement doesn't mean that the manufacturer gets to decide what they are and the ISV has to live with it or the SI has to live with it. It means that there's a real agreement about what those are, and then what the manufacturer is going to do to support and drive demand for those things has to be consistent with that. And today we have, for the last 10 or 15 years, we've been stuck in this period of time where what the manufacturer could do is just generate leads. And those leads, because they weren't based on a prior agreement about which accounts we're going to go after, were pretty random with respect to what the channel partners might actually have wanted to go sell. But the technologies that we have today and the ability to target a set of accounts, to drive advertising into those accounts and what other tactics are available, has really improved to the point where we can be much more specific about that set of accounts. And I think we've learned lessons in the last 10 or so years that just because you have a lead doesn't mean you should follow up on a lead or send that to a partner. Right? We need to get past that. Just because somebody fills out a form doesn't mean you're obliged to do something about it. We need to make sure and be disciplined about the fact that either this thing is in a account that we care about or it's not. And if it isn't, it shouldn't go anywhere. If you're a manufacturer producing leads that don't fit with the accounts that your partners can sell to, then don't send them, right? Make sure that you're clear about that and you're aligned on that, but don't try to send those to your partners because they're no good. They're going to clog up the system. And your channel partners are going to think you're not the brightest, let's say that, right? So that's the key. It's just we've got to be aligned on that set of accounts.
Yeah. Yeah. So on that too, there's just gonna say, I mean, that's like the next level of qualifying those leads. And I think that's also part of this is an act of trust, especially as we transition away from where before we just threw the leads over to them, to now being more involved in the lead gen and having them more involved in it. And I think if we do qualify them more and we have more touches and bring more data, it does build up the trust that there's value to this.
It does, yeah, and that trust is obviously key. Yeah. There's a couple of other pieces that I think are important for folks to understand about why ABM and not just leads. I thought maybe it'd be a good point to walk through a couple of those points. Would that make sense at this point, Lee?
Yeah, go ahead. And then we have a couple of questions. Actually, we have 4 questions too. So go ahead.
Great. Let me jump into this for just a couple of minutes, just to illustrate what's wrong with the way that you might be tempted to do it today. So you might be tempted to just say, well, let's get some leads in the door. Let's do some inbound marketing, get some people to come fill out forms. We'll score those leads. We'll produce some MQLs or something like that, and then we'll build from there. And I want to discourage that. So I don't think it's necessary for organizations to go through a period of time where you're doing it wrong. And then go to the period of time where you're doing it right after. Let's just go do it right. And I want to illustrate one of the big problems with the MQL approach. All right, so this approach where we get a lead, we have that person fill out a form, and then we take action based on that, misses something really fundamental about that buyer. Your buyer, irrespective of the segment that you're in, is almost never an individual person by him or herself. And there's almost always going to be other people from that organization who are part of that buying team. And those people also do their own research. So today, in an MQL-based world, if you have people filling out forms and you respond to each one of those, this is kind of what you have. The center of the screen here, an MQL. But you can be sure that if that organization that MQL is from is going to buy something, that there are going to be other people from that organization who come to your website and also look at your content. Now, sometimes those people are going to fill out a form also. They may not do much. They may have sent somebody else to the website to get content that they're going to distribute internally. But there are going to be other people. Some they're going to fill out forms. This is the circle of pre-MQLs where maybe they didn't do a whole lot and you're not thinking that they're really interested yet. But they're on the same team as somebody who already is an MQL. Then there's a whole ring of people who are anonymous visitors. This makes up, this is not drawn to scale because this makes up 95% of the people who come to your website. Now, with the technology that we have today, we can do a really good job of identifying not who the individual people are, because that's not cool and you shouldn't be doing that, but we can figure out what companies they're coming from. And that's really important because if I have an MQL and I have no other evidence that anybody's in market from that account, no other interest being shown, that MQL is probably not a real buyer. Right, that person who's on your website looking at content, if there's nobody else from their company on your website, they're probably not a buyer. They're curious, they're interested, they've got some time on their hands, they're on a conference call that's going forever, but they're not a buyer. But if you see an MQL and you see some other people who filled out a form, or you see some anonymous traffic that's coming from the same account, now you got to think about that a little differently. And that's a really account-based approach way to think about it. It's looking at that buyer differently, understanding that the buyer is multiple people, and there's going to be evidence. If multiple people are looking at you, then they're going to leave some evidence that they're there. And if you can't find any evidence that they're there, it's probably not a real buyer. And then there's a whole nother layer of evidence about which buyers are out in market. And this is a layer of evidence typically called intent data. So intent data is really just a record of the digital behavior of people when they're researching solutions. So you mentioned, people from HR departments, people from security departments, whatever, they go out on the internet, just like we all do, and they're looking for information about how to solve the business problems that they have. How do I address these? And as they do that, they're visiting your website, they're visiting your competitors' websites, they're visiting industry analysts, they're visiting Group337. They're doing all kinds of things to try to find solutions to their problems, all of which leaves a record, right? Now, again, we're not leaving a record that's going to trace us back to an individual person. What we're doing is we're looking for which set of accounts appear to be out in market looking around right now. So if I look at what's in that outer ring, this third-party research, there's a set of evidence that can help me understand which of the accounts I care about seem to be out in market right now. And then I want to compare that to which of those, all right, so are those folks already checking us out? Because if they're not, then I want to market to those guys. If they're out in market looking around, and I can see that because they've left some evidence, they're visiting our competitors' websites, they're going to industry publications, they're going to analyst websites and looking at content. And I can see that through intent signals, and I can drive some advertising at them. If I know some of those people, I can send them emails, I can call them. What I want to do is make sure that if they're an account that I care about and they're out looking around, now my job is to get them to come look at us, right? And now I can start looking at those inner circles. So the big message here is that if you're just focused on getting somebody who fits into this inner circle, you're missing almost all of the signals that your buyers are giving you about whether they're in market or not. And if you're just looking at that MQL that's in the middle circle, you may also miss the fact that they're the only person that their company is showing any interest. If it's a big company and they're the only person showing interest, that company's not buying anything. This person's just demonstrating some interest in your solutions, right? So that's a different way of thinking about demand gen. And then I want to bring back together. So in the old days, we had account-based marketing because there weren't any inbound leads, there weren't any MQLs, and everything was outbound. And we had no idea whether a prospect was in market or not. We just had a list and we had to go down the list. And it was random with respect to who was in market because we just didn't know. So then we passed through this leads era where we got really focused on the guy in the middle of the bullseye here, and we forgot about all of the other, or we didn't know about all of the other possible evidence. We call all this other, the outer circles, we call it the dark funnel at 6Sense. So out in that dark funnel, the folks that if you're just looking at your website, you can't see, that's where all the evidence of who's in market. So in the old days when we were account-based, it was just outbound and we had no idea who was in market. But now with the technology that's available to everybody, this is not exotic, like you can get this tomorrow. You can know who's out in market looking around. Which companies should I focus on? And instead of having to prospect into just a list of accounts, now you can pair that list of accounts that you're going to go prospect into down to the ones that are actually showing some evidence of being in market. And marketing can now focus their efforts on that set of accounts so that maybe you don't even have to go prospecting. Once you know who's out in market, you drive some ads into that account, get them to come to your website. Now you have a lead from that account that's in market, and it's much easier to do. So that was a long monologue. That really big difference.
Yeah, a couple of things on that I would say is so just to that hopefully make it a little bit digestible too for other people. I like to use the stadium effect of like outside the stadium, in the seats and on the field. Like when you look at the different type of people that are there. The other thing is that I hope that in our industry we start to use the term dark funnel, because I feel like it instantly makes it digestible for people that aren't in marketing to understand that, oh, okay, so this is different. This is about the people in the dark funnel of our funnel, right? So like I personally think the language matters and that helps. Question for you, and especially as your experience dealing outside of the security industry, but utilizing an ISV model, and we have a handful of questions, but this one I want to make sure we tackle because I hear this, and Brian Karras, appreciate you putting it in there, but I do hear this, is that as a manufacturer, I have one-to-many relationships with integrators in the market, and instead of using integrators, think of ISVs in your world, right? So it's hard to tightly couple strategies with a few, right? Where you're talking about doing that, because think about it, where maybe think that a marketplace that's saturated with ISVs, right? Like, how do you manage if I have a one-to-many relationship in doing this strategy that you talk about of getting local with them to do an ABM type approach?
Big meaty question that could probably be a webinar by itself. But I think, ultimately our goal is to get closer and closer to the point where we've agreed that one, either these ISVs ISVs or SIs have a patch, an agreed upon territory, agreed upon set of solutions. If you've got a bunch in the same areas covering the same regions, then you can be, they can all provide their set of prospects to you. They might need to adopt their own practices for generating this kind of demand that we're talking about, not just the individual leads, based on their own content, based on their own ability to deliver a message to a set of prospects. So I don't think at the time that we have, we can probably get a really compelling answer to that question, because I think a lot of it has to do with how we manage the channel partners more than it has to do with just the AB and demand question. But it's all going to come down to alignment on what that set of accounts are, whether an account could be covered by a couple of different SIs. If that's the case, the manufacturer is going to benefit from creating demand, and the SIs are going to have to, you're going to have to work it out with your channel partners about how they approach that, or they compete for it. Yeah. We do have, I have examples of some of our clients back at Serious Decisions Forrester, selling through channels, generating prospects that were going to be competed for by a number of different partners. Doesn't work terribly differently from the manufacturer's perspective. You're still marketing to a set of accounts that are known. It's really what happens after that changes.
Totally fair. And I appreciate that. And it's probably, it is for a much larger conversation too. So another question that came in was, how do you know if account-based marketing is right for your company? Or, I'll even add to the question, or are you going to say that this is right for every company, right? So like, how do you view it?
So yes, it's how you do marketing and sales properly in B2B. There are circumstances in which it doesn't matter as much. So if you sell to very small businesses, if you sell to organizations where the buyer is literally one person, then the lead-based approach and the account-based approach look the same. Right? So that's a small fraction of you, but you exist. That's true for you. If your set of accounts is so completely known that it's 20 accounts globally or 30 accounts globally, and you know them all and you're in them all the time, chances are that your salespeople are going to be doing virtually all of the work, and your marketing team is there to create collateral and things for them. And then the things that we're talking about are less important. I wouldn't say that they're unimportant, because I would still want to know whether my existing account that I rely on so much, if they're out in market looking at my competitors' websites, I want to know about it. And that's possible today. That's what this dark funnel can tell you is, hey, my prospect is looking, or my existing customer has spent a lot of time on our competitors' websites in the last couple of months, because we do that within 6Sense. Does that tell us, do we have a problem in that account, and do we need to go do something? So short answer, if you sell very small organizations and you sell one thing, I would say you could just do the lead-based approach. It's probably okay. If you sell online and your sale is an e-commerce sale digitally, then you don't have to worry about this. For the rest of you, this ABM is the right way to go.
But I like you mentioned it. It's also offense and defense in some regards. So it's not just sort of single thread return on doing this. You get that. But so I like that. And just mindful of time. So we have another one that came in was, how do you build data for account-based marketing success?
It's great if you know who your existing customers are, and I don't mean that snarky or anything. You've worked with a lot of companies who've grown through acquisitions and those kinds of things, and don't have a really great record of who your existing customers are. Knowing that really helps a lot. But as long as you know that and you have a record of who your existing customers are, a company like 6Sense can bring virtually all of the rest of the data that you need. It's really also really great if you have a complete record of the interactions that your sales reps are bringing. So 6Sense can bring all of the data that's in the outer three rings of this, and you're going to collect the MQL, kind of the leads data comes in forms in your own systems. If you've been doing that for a while, great. If you're just starting up with that, then we can start that up with you. The data that is often not in systems that's super valuable is the record of who your salespeople have been talking to, what companies they're from, and then how often are they talking to them. That's what CRM systems are for. But CRM systems are often not used very well for that. But that's it. That's really what you need. You need to know who your customers are. It's great to know who you've sold to and where you failed, because that can tell you something about where you're going to be successful. But that's it. You can get the data. You can get the rest of the data you need elsewhere.
Great. And then once you're ready to market or advertise, and this might be a broader question, but I appreciate Adam for asking, but what's the best method tactic used to allow true prospects to engage with your content?
Well, I'll just say, so there isn't a given kind of tactic that is the best tactic. It's not, the videos are always better than white papers, or white papers better than videos. Ads are better than emails. The question you need to ask is, what information do my buyers need throughout their buyer journey from beginning to end? Like, what are the things that they're going to need to be able to make a good decision in our favor, right? And then how do they like to consume that information? And, we find people like video, right? Of course, people like videos, but that's not suitable for every kind of content, for every message. So as a marketing organization, a big part of your job is understand your buyers. What do they need? What does that buyer journey look like? And then what's the best way to present that information to them? It's not, what am I good at? It's not, what are my competitors doing? It's, what do my buyers need and how do they need to get it? Those are the best tactics.
Totally fair. All right, we'll make this one the last question is, what are marketing components of account-based marketing?
Great. So one is marketing often provides the data and the intelligence around the ICP, the ideal customer profile. That data is going to come partly from sales, but marketing is generally the one who's going out and working with a company like 6Sense to do that more sophisticated work of understanding how to identify that set of accounts that's going to be an ideal set of accounts for you. Right, so agreeing on that. And then what I just talked about, marketing's got to understand what are the messages that the buyers need across that buyer's journey. First of all, what does that buyer's journey look like? What are the key decision points? What are the key questions that people have? Who are the people involved? And that's something that you can learn by working with sales and with product. And then delivering those messages and developing the systems to deliver the messages to that audience in the right way. That, of course, is a thing that 6Sense does, right? So, one answer would be you hire us, and we do a lot of that.
Very nice. Well done. Subtle. Yeah. No, that's totally fair. So mindful of time, we got 2 minutes left. So I guess if people do want to find more information from you, and I know we had a handful of other things too, so maybe we'll follow up with we had some feedback on how to start, what to do, how to go fast or go slow, whatever it might be. But we'll get into that maybe as in a follow up. But in the last minute that we have here, I mean, if people want to learn more and get a hold of you, what's the best way to do that?
6sense.com is where we are. And of course, you can find how to contact us from the website. Plenty of ways to do it. And if you come to our website, we're probably going to know what company you're coming from, so we might come look as well.
Very, very fair. So you eat your own dog food, which is great to hear. So, well, thank you. This has been great. I love that the people that attended stayed throughout. Great questions. If we didn't answer your question, we'll follow up with it to make sure that we do. If there's any follow-up ones you have afterwards, most of you that are on here know how to get a hold of me, so please do that. On that end, engage with the Insight Community app and ask questions, and we'll do that. And then I really appreciate you doing this, so thank you.